Hello dear students. I, Mrs. Rajashree Naik, welcomes you again in online lecture series arranged by Gokhale Education Society's BYK College of Commerce, Nasik. Today, we will begin our lecture with chapter number 9, Economic Policy of India since 1991. So students, these are the content points which we will be studying in this lecture. Introduction part of this chapter, main objectives of the economic policy of 1991, features of the economic policy of 1991, components of new economic policy, measures taken for liberalization, and expected questions. Let us see the introduction part of this chapter. In the beginning of the last decade of the 20th century, Indian economy experienced an economic crisis. At the end of June 1991, foreign currency assets declined to such an extent that it was barely enough to finance 2 weeks of imports. The annual rate of inflation reached to 16.7% in August 1991. The government expenditure was greater than its revenue due to defense expenditure, subsidies, interest on loans, etc. The positive effects of socialist pattern of society was on the verge of decline. On this ground, it was necessary to bring new changes in the economy. Hence, Government of India adopted a new economic policy, NEP, in 1991. The process of new economic policy, which started in 1985, got a momentum in 1991. The new industrial policy introduced radical changes to unshackle India's industrial economy from the cobweb of unnecessary bureaucratic controls and rigidity in the government procedures. According to the new industrial policy, the state will no longer play the role of a controller and regulator, but it will act as the facilitator, coordinator, inspirer, and supervisor. Now, let us see the main objectives of the economic policy of 1991. Number 1, to plunge the Indian economy into the arena of globalization. Now here, to plunge means to enter quickly and forcibly into the arena of globalization and to give it a new thrust on market orientation. Second objective, to bring down the rate of inflation. Now students, what do you mean by inflation? Inflation is a continuous rise in general price level. So the new economic policy intended to bring down the rate of inflation. Third objective, to correct the disequilibrium in the balance of payments. Now students, what do you mean by balance of payments? Balance of payments is an accounting of a country's international transaction for a particular time period. And a disequilibrium means its condition of surplus or deficit. Fourth objective, to acquire higher economic growth rate. Means what? Means increase in the real national income of a country over a long period of time. Number 5, to build sufficient foreign exchange reserves. Foreign exchange reserves are the assets which are held on reserve by a central bank in foreign currencies. NEP intended to move towards higher economic growth rate and to build sufficient foreign exchange reserves. Next, sixth main objective, to achieve economic stabilization and to reduce fiscal deficit. It wanted to achieve economic stabilization and to convert the economy into market economy. How? By removing all kinds of unnecessary restrictions. And now, to reduce fiscal deficit means what? Fiscal deficit means the difference between total revenue and total expenditure of the government is termed as fiscal deficit. So naturally, sixth objective is to achieve economic stabilization and to reduce fiscal deficit. Seventh objective, to establish international trade relations for free flow of goods without any restrictions. It wanted to permit the international flow of goods, services, capital, human resources, and technology without any type of restrictions. And 8, to increase the participation of private sector. It wanted to increase the participation of private players in the all sectors of the economy. That is why the reserve number of sectors for government were reduced, and as of now, this number is just 2. Now, students, let us see the features of the economic policy of 1991. So, first feature, delicensing. It means abolition of government license required to carry on any business or industrial activity. All industries except 18 specified industries of strategic importance require license. As per the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, Government of India, only the following 4 industries require compulsory licensing. Number 1, electronic, aerospace and defense equipment. Number 2, industrial explosives. Number 3, hazardous chemicals, drugs and pharmaceuticals. And number 4 is cigarettes. Now, second feature, abolition of monopolies and restrictive trade practices, means MRTP Act. According to MRTP Act, it was compulsory for large industrial houses to take the approval of central government for establishment, expansion, merger, etc. Okay, now see again, according to MRTP Act, it was compulsory for large industrial houses to take the approval of central government for establishment of expansion, merger, etc. This resulted in slow industrial growth. So abolition of MRTP Act has encouraged industrial growth. Due to various controls, the economy became defective. The entrepreneurs were unwilling to establish new industries because laws like MRTP Act 1969 demotivated entrepreneurs. Corruption, undue delays, and inefficiency risen due to these controls. Rate of economic growth of the economy come down. So, in such a scenario, economic reforms were introduced to reduce restrictions imposed on the economy. Now, next feature, encouragement to small sector. The government encouraged small sector units to attain a higher growth rate in output, employment, and export sector. Its investment limit was increased from 1 crore to 5 crores. So, these companies can upgrade their machinery and improve their efficiency. Okay, so these companies can upgrade their machinery and improve their efficiency. In other words, we can say that due to increase in the investment limit for the small scale industries, which encourages competitiveness and technology upgradation. Next feature, encouraging foreign investment. Industrial policy of 1991 approved foreign direct investment, means FDI, foreign direct investment, to encourage investment in high priority industries requiring high investment and technology. Initially, FDI was permitted up to 51% of total investment in selected industries. Later, this limit was raised to 74% and then 100% for specific industries. The industries in which automatic approval was granted included a wide range of industrial activities in the capital goods and metallurgical industries, entertainment, electronics, food processing, and the service sectors have significant export potential. Besides, this included a number of other industries which are important for the rapid growth of the economy. The limit was subsequently raised from 51%, just I said, to 74% and then to 100% for many of these industries. Now, next feature, feature number 5, reducing role of public sector. Many changes were made in the public sector policy to include following objectives. Number 1, ending state monopoly. Number B or number 2, we can say improving efficiency of public sector. And C, releasing capital blocked in public sector enterprise. In the pre-1991 era, the key industrial sectors, namely the iron and steel industry, heavy machinery industry, air travel sector, shipbuilding sector, telecommunications and the general communication sector, etc. The private sector after this policy could enter these industries without many obstacles. The Indian Railways and the army equipment industry, the nuclear energy industry will remain under the control of the government. Very much important. The Indian Railways, the army equipment industry, the nuclear energy industry still remain under the control of the government. There is no entry for the private sector. Now, number 6, trade liberalization. Import licensing controls have been abolished. Almost all capital goods, raw materials, intermediate goods, and other components were made freely importable. With the aim to increase international competitiveness of Indian economy and infuse foreign capital and technology, the liberalization of trade and investment regime was done. Import licenses and export duties were removed. Also, quota on imports was abolished. Established exporters are allowed to raise external credit to finance their trade. Special economic zones means says special economic zones are set up to promote exports. Now, what do you mean by says? What do you mean by special economic zones? It refers to an area with particular economic advantages such as low taxes than the rest of the country, so as to encourage investment and development there. The government has also introduced the concept of agro-export zones to encourage agriculture products. 7th feature, reforms in insurance sector. Insurance sector was a monopoly of the government. The new policy passed Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority, IRDA, in 1999 to introduce reforms in this sector. Under the government's FDI reforms for the insurance sector, the 4 public sector general insurance companies will be permitted to raise capital from the market. However, the government's holdings will not fall below 51%. The IRDA means Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority Act has given license to many private companies to enter insurance business. This has ended the monopoly of government in this sector. Now, next feature, reforms in financial sector. Earlier, only cooperative banks and public sector banks were permitted to do banking business in the financial sector. The new economic policy has also permitted the entry of new private banks and foreign banks. The Reserve Bank of India, means RBI, regulates and controls the financial industry in India. The RBI's function shifted significantly from regulator to facilitator of the financial industry as a result of liberalization. In the Indian banking industry, the free play of market forces has resulted in the rise of private bankers, both domestic and international. Foreign institutional investors were also allowed to invest in Indian financial markets as a result of liberalization. Now, students, let us see the components of the economic policy of 1991, new economic policy, NEP. The components, 3 components are there: liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So in this lecture, we are going to study about liberalization. Now let us see the meaning of liberalization. Meaning, liberalization refers to economic freedom or freedom for economic decision. Liberalization refers to economic freedom or freedom for economic decision. It means producers, consumers, and owners of factors of production are free to take decision to promote their self-interest. Adam Smith, in his book, Wealth of Nations, suggested that economic liberalization is the best economic policy to promote economic growth and well-being of the people. Now here well-being is what? Welfare of the people. The economic policy which leads to reduction, if not removal, of barriers in the working of market mechanism and free competition is called as economic liberalization. According to classical economists, what do you mean by liberalization? Now see, according to classical economists, what they say, the economic policy which leads to reduction, if not removal, just I said, barriers in the working of market mechanism and free competition is called as economic liberalization. Now, according to Dr. M. Ramanjaneni, economic liberalization means scrapping of the undesirable restrictions, controls, and licensing over investment, imports, and production. Okay, now the measures taken for liberalization. The first measure, flexibility of interest rate. Under the policy of liberalization, commercial banks have the freedom to determine the rate of interest depending upon the market forces of demand and supply. In other words, we can say that banks all over the country are now free to determine the rate of interest as they like, which was earlier determined by the RBI. Okay, second measure, freedom for expansion of industries. In this new liberalized era, the industries are free to diversify their production capacity and reduce the cost of production. Under the new policy, industries are free to expand and produce. Earlier, a maximum limit of production capacity was set at the time of granting license, and no industry could produce beyond this limit. Before 1991, earlier, a maximum limit of production capacity was set at the time of granting license, and no industry could produce beyond this limit. But now, this limit has been removed, enabling the industries to enjoy large-scale production. Producers are now free to produce anything on the basis of demand in the market. Now, the next measure, abolition of monopolies and restrictive trade practices. According to MRTP Act of 1969, all those companies having assets worth rupees 100 crores and more were classified as MRTP firms and were subject to several restrictions. Now, these firms have the freedom to take investment decisions. Earlier, according to MRTP Act, all companies having assets worth more than 100 crore were declared as, just I said, MRTP firms, and restricted were put. Now, the capital investment limit fixed earlier has been removed. Now, the capital investment limit fixed earlier has been removed. Companies falling under MRTP Act are given concessions. They no longer require prior government approval and they are free to expand themselves. Next measure, reforms in FERA. To bring about flexibility in the laws relating to foreign exchange. Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, means FERA, was replaced by Foreign Exchange Management Act, means FEMA. This would encourage international trade. Okay, to bring about flexibility in the laws relating to foreign exchange, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, means FERA, was replaced by Foreign Exchange Management Act, means FEMA. This would encourage international trade. Now, what is FERA? FERA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1973, an act to regulate certain payments dealing in foreign exchange, securities, the import and export of currency, and acquisition of immovable property by foreigners. And now FEMA means FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, was introduced as a replacement for the earlier FERA to promote orderly development and maintenance of foreign exchange market in India. Next measures, investment in infrastructure. Infrastructure was open to domestic as well as foreign investors. They could invest in rail, roads, and power projects. Infrastructure plays an increasingly important role in international trade and investment. Developing countries cannot link into the global economy and export products at competitive prices without sufficient and good quality electricity, telecommunications, and transport networks, etc. Massive infrastructure improvements are required in such countries. Due to this, foreign direct investment in infrastructure has increased rapidly in new economic policy. Next measures taken for liberalization, encouragement to foreign technology. Liberalization has allowed the use of foreign technology in high priority industries. This helps to reduce the cost and make the industries competitive. Government has allowed agreements to import high technology. Provision has been made that high priority industries need not seek permission to enter into agreements relating to high technology. Industries are free to buy machines and raw materials from abroad in order to expand or modernize. Next one is SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India. SEBI was established on 12th April 1992. This step was introduced to protect the interest of investors in securities, promote development, and regulate the securities market. Now, students, why was SEBI formed? Now, listen the reasons. At the end of 1970s and during the 1980s, capital markets were emerging as the new sensation among the individuals of India. Many malpractices started taking place, such as unofficial self-styled merchant bankers, unofficial private placements, rigging of prices, violation of rules and regulations of stock exchanges, delay in delivery of shares, etc. Due to these malpractices, people started losing confidence in the stock market. The government felt a sudden need to set up an authority to regulate the working and reduce these malpractices. And as a result, the government came up with the establishment of SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India. SEBI is a statutory regulatory body established on the 12th April 1992. It monitors and regulates the Indian capital and securities market while ensuring to protect the interest of the investors, formulating regulations and guidelines. So students, now let us see. So these are the measures taken in liberalization. And now let us see the expected questions on today's content. Answer in detail. Question number 1. Explain the features of the economic policy of 1991. And question number 2. Explain the measures taken for liberalization. So students, to wind up, I hope that today's lecture will prove beneficial for the preparation of annual exam. Till then, have a great time. Thank you.